Oh, there we go. Got it. Great. Let me find my agenda again. All right, so start off with roll call. We'll start the meeting. It is 4:30. Commissioner Josephson.
And
Commissioner Fribley, I don't see currently. Commissioner Helmner. Present. Commissioner Donovan. Here.
Here.
Commissioner Wood, I know he had a conflict and was hoping to change time, so maybe showing up a little bit late. Commissioner Swainson Harris, I believe, is planning to attend, maybe running a little bit late. And Commissioner Howard.
Present.
Excellent. I am going to kick us off with our land acknowledgement, abbreviated, for this group. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we are on, that we now call Springfield, is located on the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. We acknowledge that the city of Springfield shares this history with the exclusion and erasure of many indigenous peoples, including the Kalapuya and those who first inhabited land on which we are located. We also acknowledge that Kalapuya people are still stewards of this land and contribute to our history today. All right. So jumping right into it, we have a packed kind of agenda today, so I'm going to jump right in. What I have on the agenda so far is our land use application review, which I sent out last week from Shannon, and she's gratefully joined us to help answer any questions or help with that review. Excuse me. And Shannon, I'll hand it over to you here in a minute to kind of summarize what you thought, to introduce that part. And then we're going to talk about our work plan. Any updates on those things. A good chunk of the meeting we'll spend talking about visioning for our next work plan, and then talk about next steps, and that will include updates on appointments for commissioner, and then our nomination, our voting for new chair and vice chair, and some upcoming trainings and revisions of our meeting times. Any other additions or things that we need to be added to the agenda? Okay. So let's kick it off and jump right into our land use review. I don't think we have any business from the audience. I didn't see any on Springfield Oregon Speaks. Is that correct, Tom?
That's correct.
Okay. So yes, we can jump right into our application for 6444 4th Street. That included renovation of the structure, and I think we talked about this briefly at one of our previous meetings, basically to provide for an internal ADU to that house. So there's a couple exterior modifications that would happen along with that. Shannon, do you want to jump in and summarize what your thoughts were on this?
So I reviewed this application last week. I'm looking at my other screen to kind of jog my memory a little bit on it. But I didn't have any red flags that came out in particular in relation to the ADU as proposed. Things that I found in the little 2 pages I wrote up was related to the fact that the addition was already there when the building was surveyed and the National Register district was put together. So it's not going to change massing. It's not going to change much location. It's not changing a bunch at the historic character. It's not even, for the most part, changing the historic character or anything glaring to the property. A few things that came up in the ADU proposal that might be worth suggesting, I think, as you move forward with it. It has to do with the comments that were made about the siding of the original house and having it be preserved. It would be much better to preserve the existing siding that is on the interior side that will be re-exposed when they put a breezeway circulation space between the existing or the original house and the living room addition, because they're going to take a portion of the interior space and make that exterior space for circulation between the back of the original house and the garage that's still at the back side of the property. That original siding, I best practices would be that if more than 50% of the material is deteriorated, then replace it. But if we can get preservation of the existing material, filling nail holes and encapsulating any lead, that would be the first preference for the treatment of the siding. I did name a contraption called a speed heater, which is an ultraviolet heater that heats up paint that can then help it be removed as you scrape across it. Basically, it keeps the paint that could be lead based from becoming airborne as dust. So there are products out there that can be used to deal with lead if there is lead, in fact, in that siding. And I would guarantee that there is, well, I'm not going to guarantee it, but I'm going to say it's very highly likely that there is probably lead paint on that surface of the house. I did not see any other issues with paint colors or with the windows or doors in particular. The only thing that I might suggest is that instead of matching the siding on the new addition, that a similar board and batten hardy plank material be used in the cladding material of that addition. It already has a T111 siding, which I don't really like, and I think it's a poor choice for deterioration and further use. So let's not replicate that. But if they could just use a hardy plank board and batten siding or some other siding that is similar to what is there, it doesn't have to match exactly. It makes it clear that there is one portion of the house that has this original wood siding that is very nice and horizontal and probably very straight old growth grain wood. And that this addition, is secondary to that primary residence. And so if there's a recommendation, that might be to provide a different type of board and batten or allow it to be vertical rather than continue the horizontal siding all the way through the building. So all in all, I think it's a great reuse or adaptive use of space. And so I don't think that there are any problems. Again, it's not dealing with massing issues. It's not really dealing with density or building footprint or additional footprint. It simply is a reuse of an existing space.
Awesome. Yeah, this is nice to have kind of a straightforward one for folks who this is their first time doing this. So any questions from commissioners on Shannon's comments or on your own review of the application? Okay. Well then,
Awesome.
Elise, did you have something?
I had a motion.
You had a motion. Okay, go ahead.
Recommend approval with conditions. So that we recommend the not replicating the T111 and instead going with a historically accurate material to the extent that it is visible to the exterior.
Great. So in essence, we're proposing to support Shannon's recommendations in our recommendations then. Is that true? Okay.
That was my intention.
Yes, great.
Yeah, I got a question. So did you mean the breezeway where where the original house, to make that back the way it was in 1905 or when it was built? Is that what you mean? As much as possible?
So, yes, they're proposing to do rehabilitation of that back side of the house that is currently encapsulated within the addition. And
Right.
they are recommending that they are going to either, well, it's a little vague as to what they are wanting to do with the siding on that side of the building. It's a little bit of an unknown because I'm not sure they understand the condition or what the condition might be of that siding as they start the renovation. I'm recommending that if more than 50% of it is deteriorated beyond the point of conservation, preservation of its existing form, that it be allowed to be replicated or to be put back in a historic sense. You know, that was my one concern, is that was a little bit vague in there in the application, was what are they doing with the historic siding on the original 1905 house? And so I wanted to try to encourage or recommend encouragement of preserving the original historic siding. They have in the application said that they are going to preserve the wood windows or the window openings that are there, the windows and the doors that are in that back, and expose them again and, you know, keep them. So there's no question about the removal of historic fabric being the 1905 house from the buildings in the application, with the exception of that siding in that one very limited space. So that was where the vagueness in the comments about the preserving the historic siding were. Where there is the addition, which is the 1980s living room space that was kind of collected or, you know, added to the original house, they're going to basically make that interior space shorter for that breezeway. And on that addition, my recommendation is to not match the historic siding of the 1905 house. The recommendation for that addition is to maybe do a vertical siding like what was there or something, because it is separate. It's not, well, we could argue that it's almost historic in its own right, because we're becoming close to 50 years for 1980, which is kind of scary, but it's not historic. So allowing the addition to be whatever it really needs to be, it doesn't need to look like the 1905 house, if that answers the question. Along with
Yes.
it. Okay.
Great. All right, so we have a motion on the table to, if Elise, is it okay for me to reword that to let's support motion being to support the recommendations from 5-4 Architecture? Do we have a
Seconded.
okay, great. All in favor?
Okay.
Anyone opposed? Nope. Great. All right, so I will, Tom, I guess I don't need to do anything further, I think, since we just all approved to support Shannon's recommendations on this. Do you need anything additional from me? Sometimes I also write up additional comments from commissioners and incorporate Shannon's recommendations in an official commissioner recommendation, but since there's no other comments, is it okay to just take what Shannon provided?
Yes, yeah, I'm fine with that. We have full consensus on this, so as long as I receive Shannon's comments, I will get those incorporated into the decision.
Awesome. Thank you.
It's
So
all
I'll make
great
sure-
news. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Shannon, so much. You're welcome to hang out, but we will move on the agenda.
I would love to, but I've got a couple of things going on. So you guys have a good rest of your evening.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That was nice and easy. So that, just as a recap, review wise, I feel like this review process went about as smoothly as we can ask. We got notification in time that we could get it sent to our consultant. She had enough time to review it and get us a report. We were able to get that report prior to us meeting. So ideally, commissioners would have at least a few days to kind of run through it before this. And luckily it wasn't a super controversial one, so we got to practice a little bit again. And oftentimes Shannon will attend the meeting to help answer questions and clarify, but she's not always able to do that. So sometimes we have to modify our process, but I feel like this process kind of was our ideal. So yay. It worked out. All right, I'm going to move along to reviewing work plan. Celine, we have our standing walking tour guides item with Celine there, but she is not here currently, so we'll table that for next time.
He is.
I'm
here.
Oh, you're here. I can't see you.
That said, I think we might want to table it for next time. I'm not currently in front of the computer that my research is on. So I don't have too much to share other than that I did find that interestingly enough, Wikipedia has much better quality photos of our own walking tour houses than we do. So I'm slowly working my way through compiling a little bit of information on each of the houses.
Oh, interesting. Good find. Okay, awesome. Well, we'll leave that one on there. We can touch on it in the future. The other item we have on there is Charlotte. She has some updates about some training she went to. Are you ready for that, Charlotte?
Yeah, thanks for making a little time for this. I just got back from the Association for Preservation Technology conference up in Seattle. And in fact, our consultant Shannon was there as well. So we got to catch up. This was a pretty amazing conference. It was 6 days of just packed information about, I guess with sort of a focus on mostly architects and engineers and policymakers and contractors and people who, create products for historic preservation, like hands-on projects. So there's a lot of examples of adaptive reuse of historic structures for public benefit, commercial use, all kinds of things like that. There are a couple of topics that I thought I would just mention briefly, and then if there's anything that you guys want to learn more about or that we want to follow up on, I have lots of notes and downloaded resources and things that we could dive into, but I don't want to make too many assumptions about how everybody wants to spend their time or what's most applicable to the commission. So the 4 topics that I think came up out of the conference that might be the most relevant are disaster preparedness and how that relates to historic preservation, really understanding and measuring the climate impact of preserving existing structures, not even necessarily like capital H historic, but just existing structures. And then equitable development, sort of thinking about preservation and affordable housing at the same time. And then there was also an interesting theme around like open data and sort of communication. So on the topic of disaster preparedness, one of the main takeaways I learned is that if we had a disaster in our community, one of the things that FEMA and other agencies will do is fund shelved projects as a way to kind of stimulate recovery, and that cultural resources are pretty highly valued, not necessarily in the first phase of response where you're really thinking about shelter, food, water, healthcare, but in sort of the like second and third wave of a disaster response, state and federal agencies like very formally and they value and will invest in projects that restore kind of cultural connections, because they know that really does help with recovery. If people are practicing traditions and seeing things that speak to their sense of identity and community, that really does impact their recovery on all fronts. So not that we want that to happen, but we do. It is worth knowing that even if we have some preservation plans or survey projects that we would like to do, but they're kind of sitting on a shelf, sometimes those are funded just for the sake of kind of getting things going again. On the topic of equitable development, there was a great presentation kind of focused on several cities in Washington state, but that's applicable here, which is really looking at the ways that preservation and affordable housing can work together. It also pointed out a couple of ways in which they're often at loggerheads, but I think the takeaway was that conflict is mostly due to gaps in ordinances and incentive programs. There's a lot of like shared values in preservation and affordable housing. They don't have to just inherently be at odds, but sometimes our codes and how we're moving forward with different projects, sometimes those fail to kind of work the two things together holistically. So we could learn more by digging into that presentation or those resources. On the topic of open data, sharing data about historic resources and making it more accessible in terms of the format is really strongly encouraged. Unfortunately, our Oregon SHPO database and then the National Register of Historic Places are both kind of notoriously behind the ball on this, but especially the National Historic Register is kind of being left behind in a way that, a lot of other federal agencies, I think starting with the Obama administration, really adopted tools for open data, and the National Register has been kind of left behind. So that, I don't know what we as a commission can do about that, but I think it's worth knowing that that's a theme throughout kind of the preservation community that got highlighted in a lot of different sessions. The last thing I'll mention is that there was a lot of talk in this conference about how much when we build with steel and concrete and we build new, we are really dramatically spending down our carbon budget as a planet. Anytime we're building new with steel and carbon, we are sort of pushing ourselves closer to a brink. And one of the things that's really helpful in retaining existing structures is to be able to actually measure what the environmental impact is of saving the structure, like no action, just retaining the structure, modifying the structure to make it operate more efficiently, or replacing it entirely. And for a long time, preservationists have said that the greenest building is the one already standing, but we haven't always had good data, and now we do. So there is a program called the CARE tool, and I'll drop a link in the comments, but it is meant to help really calculate kind of both the embodied energy in a building that has already been created, but also the operational cost and what the operational cost could be if certain modifications are made. This is really a game changer for architects and engineers and planners who are working with existing structures. So it was like, got a standing ovation at the conference. It's a big deal. And the folks who have been developing this tool mentioned that it is most effective when it's applied at a portfolio scale. So they use the example of a college campus where you can use the tool to, in a couple minutes, run a pretty, get a quick data set about what to do with a particular like dorm on a college campus, for instance. But when a college uses it to look at all of the buildings in their portfolio, then you are more empowered to make decisions with one property and maybe offset that decision or do something associated within your portfolio to really meet your environmental goals. They would like to continue to develop the tool by looking at other examples of portfolios. And in talking to one of the folks who's working on this research, I did ask them if they've done any case studies where they looked at maybe a small commercial downtown, like the one that we have in Springfield. And they said that they have not been able to do that yet, but they would really, really like to, and that they would need to find a community that would like to work with them on doing some research of that kind. So the idea would be to sort of help property owners and communities better quantify and understand the environmental impact that they're making by preserving and adapting their existing downtown. So that's everything I wanted to share. It's kind of a dump, sorry for that, but any questions or things we want to explore?
I had a question. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. The one that I'm interested in right now for various reasons, but the equitable housing or the I don't know what you called it, preservation and development. Did they have good examples of how that's being done currently? Do you have like case studies or specific things that you could share?
They did have some case studies. I'll go back and see what I can find in a good shareable format.
Okay. Yeah, if you have anything, I'd be interested in just being curious about that.
And there's one other thing that came out of that presentation that I forgot to mention, which is that there are some communities are using equity maps to really like overlay an equity map that sort of maps the like mobility and like economic, the privilege of different neighborhoods in one study area. And then they'll overlay that with their survey and inventory map. And what they often see is that there's just more of a preservation sort of momentum and more bandwidth that's being spent in the privileged communities of a city. And that it can be really helpful to use that mapping exercise as a way to intentionally shift focus on areas of the community that have historic resources. We're just maybe less aware of them, or there are fewer, there's maybe not been a history of studying them and documenting them to help us be aware of them.
Any other questions for Charlotte? I think that's a good introduction to kind of our next item on the agenda. So I'm glad that fit in there. Because those kinds of things are always helpful. One, so we can continue to learn or get things on our radar as we're listening to news or other things going on in other communities. But also thinking about what else our commission wants to focus on in the future. So if there's nothing else for Charlotte, I'm going to jump into the next item on the agenda. If anybody else goes to workshops or trainings and has little snippets and inspirations they want to bring back, it is very welcome. Just feel free to even just add it to the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. Okay, thanks, Charlotte. All right, so visioning for the next work plan. We are ahead of schedule, so we have a little extra time, which is great. I am going to try to finish this portion of it up earlier than we originally said. I think we were aiming to be done by 5:45, but I'd like to provide a little more time for those last items. So I've got 500 things open. Give me a second here. Oh my gosh. I had it open. I'm getting there. Okay, yeah, here we go. I'm going to share our work plan from last year because I think there may be a couple folks who haven't seen this yet. All right, everybody seeing the work plan? Oh, no. There we go. I just shared it. You seeing it now? Okay. So we created our first work plan last year. The way we did it is, and before we had never had, the way we did our grant was basically to just have a brainstorming discussion. We wrote a bunch of ideas up and then we kind of just talked through what we wanted to propose in the grant. And that worked too. But this allowed us to think broader because if it was like, this is going to be funded through the grant, but we also might be able to get sponsors or partners to help fund these other things. We might also be able to go out for a grant if it's not included. So it helps us kind of prioritize what we would like to try to accomplish. And then also document things that we're not accomplishing for future consideration and keep that tracked just for future conversations. So the beginning of this work plan just kind of provides an overview of who we are, the types of work that we do. These are kind of our ongoing tasks to do the application review. We regularly do education and training as we can for both ourselves, but the community. The Springfield Historic Preservation Awards now has been going on for 2 years. So I'm considering that our kind of ongoing project that we've started and are carrying forward. And then just general commission administration. So, managing the budget, trying to create our work plans, recruiting new members, all those kinds of things that come with just being a part of the commission. Last year in our work plan, we had to carry forward with the Heritage Awards. We have a subcommittee that oversees that, so there's kind of a description in here about what that includes and some of the tasks associated with it. We have this item to support local preservation efforts in Springfield. This was to support local landowners. This ended up not coming out the way that we originally had envisioned it being, because what the idea was to be able to provide funds to anybody who kind of wanted support to do their preservation projects. I think to some degree, but we had a couple specific ones in mind. When it came time to write the grant, the only way that we could make this one eligible for the actual grant was to make it an ILS, basically. The intensive level survey, or an RLS, or something that the SHPO wanted to see as a deliverable. We start getting into complications we learned with the grant when we are passing funds through. We can't take the federal dollars and just hand them off to people. We need to have a very specific procedure created to do that. So it's not that we can't do it. We just need to understand what the requirements from SHPO are and have all of our bases covered before we hand out money, the money that we receive from the CLG at least. The other project we had was the reconnaissance level survey, which we completed. And then education and awards topic. So here we talked about the mailing postcards, which is something we regularly try to do. I think that was it, pretty much grouped in there. And then we have this list of future projects and ideas. And so I'll run through some of those right now. Inventory of the Washburn district, so complete that inventory. And then also there's this expanded idea of doing kind of a landscape survey. We've never documented historic trees or what the significance of the landscape is. So some of that includes like where the houses are set back, are the houses elevated off the street view, trying to capture kind of the feel of the Washburn district and maybe how to preserve that. But then not only in Washburn, if we were to think about like historic trees, we could expand that to look in other areas of Springfield and not be Washburn centric necessarily in some of those. We always try to consider some funds for education for commissioners. Awards, we have that. Consultant support is very important right now. I think we just witnessed why Shannon is so valuable to us. We haven't always had a consultant, so I would love to see that something that's standing in our grant at least. Assist with listing of the Jaquia House, which we did accomplish through supporting William Lane's efforts. And so they have completed the ILS, and the next step is to move towards listing that resource. And then code update. So this was one that came up about a year ago. There was a lot more talk about this, but the city was going through code revisions for the entire city. And there was some talk of the commission being involved in discussions with that, and whether or not the Washburn overlay district was going to get updated and what that might look like. My understanding, Tom can maybe speak to this better, but my understanding is that code update project was put on hold and maybe is going to start picking up again soon. But that the historic overlay district revisions would be kind of a ways off maybe before that conversation happens. Is that still the case, Tom?
No, I don't.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
I missed the last part of that, but overall,
okay.
no, I do not.
You don't know. Okay. Oh, Mark's here. Hey, look at that.
I could chime in a little bit if you want on this.
Yeah, I was just thinking that Mark would know.
So, and I was, for people that may not know, I was the project manager on the last big code update project that concluded July of last year. I kind of talk about, we probably updated maybe 2/3 or 70% of our development code. It was originally envisioned to be a phased project. We did phases 1 and 2, and phase 3 was left for later. And so that's kind of what's being talked about now is, and it did get put on hold. A lot of other state mandates for things to happen have come along. And I've moved away from that role at the city. And so we do have a new code writer, a planner that is our code writer. Her name's Chelsea. No, excuse me. Is that right? No, Haley Campbell. Sorry. And so anyway, we are in a position where we're kind of gearing back up to do different parts of that phase 3 of the code update. I think now would be a pretty good time to advocate for including the historic section of the code to be included. Sandy Belson's the comprehensive planning manager who manages Haley. And so I think that would be maybe something from you, Christina, as the chair, or from the larger group, potentially a letter or an email or something advocating for that to Sandy. And it could at least get it back on the radar in terms of where it falls on the priority list. They're currently in that process of figuring out where priorities should fall and what's kind of the most pressing needs. But I think it would be important to re-engage in that conversation, and now is probably a pretty good time to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's good to know.
Mhm.
I know that we had an assessment done. It was like the camp education training that we all had from then. I'm gonna ruin the acronyms. National Alliance of Historic Commission. Yeah, Charlotte, help me out.
I think it's the National Council of Preservation Commissions, something like that.
Yeah, that one. Thank you. Anyways, they did like review the code, and I think in their final report and working with us, I think they did have a couple of recommendations for looking at our code and how it could better serve our review process. We've had Shannon's is probably familiar with this too, our consultant, but one of the things that we thought about doing in this was to look at other communities' codes and to try to compare ours to theirs. And it would ideally be done through the lens of somebody who's very familiar with code writing and historic preservation, both, you know, and be able to say like, this is what has been successful for communities, and maybe these are things that are less successful, and provide us maybe like a in my mind, like getting like a report or a technical review from somebody with both those expertise would be helpful. Is that something, Mark, that you think would be helpful for the city if the commission tried to help get something like that created?
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I would say providing that report, first of all, to Haley. And then, I mean, the less code writing work that Haley would have to do. I mean, if you could hand her something, say, here, process this and see, you know, make this happen kind of thing would be one way to go about it. The less work Haley would have to do in actually drafting the code, if you gave her a starting point of a draft, that would be a huge help. The other thing to maybe think about too is, based on this report you're mentioning, is potentially have a kind of some quick fix type of things. Like these would be really, if we have limited capacity to do some quick fix things that we could incorporate into other processes, versus like a wholesale rewrite of the entire section of code. So you might think about it in those two realms. Like if all we could do is a little bit, here would be some really key things to change in the short term. And then longer term, we would really like to see this larger look. And I don't know what your current status is with your consultant in terms of contract time or budget and stuff like that. But if your consultant has any time to commit or dedicate to any of that kind of drafting work, that may be something worthwhile to look into as well. And I'll just explain one of the dynamics that we deal with. So any code changes have to be co-adopted by Lane County. It's just with so many things coming at us right now with the state mandates. we are also really taxing the county staff and planning commission and then joint board of county commissioners, city council hearings, process times and things like that. So Sandy's having to be really strategic about when and how we ask to have those joint meetings. So again, if there's something we can just hang on to another process that's already going to one of these joint meetings, and a joint hearing process, this is just one more piece of that, which is what we're doing with some of the code cleanup. There's little minor fixes and things as part of the larger code update that we did last year. We're recognizing, oh, well, we missed this, or a small tweak here, typos and things like that. We're doing some small code cleanup types of things that we're tacking on to other joint processes that are going on. So this could be potentially similar to that. Like, hey, you're already going through this joint process to take all this other stuff. Take this along with it.
Okay, and is there currently a schedule at all in place for future code revisions?
There
Or
are,
should we
and
talk to Haley more?
yeah,
Learn more about that?
Haley
Yeah.
would be able to give you that, Haley and or Sandy.
Okay. Okay, so maybe the first step on that is to figure out timeline, because that would determine what we don't have grant funds available for us again until next spring. And so depending how quick of a turnaround we'd need.
Yeah, I
that'll
don't think
probably
it's
determine our
anything.
strategy.
I think there's multiple opportunities over, say, the next year or even two.
Okay,
It's just strategic on when we're going to be able to take joint processes to the county and our planning commission and then ultimately our city council. So it's not something that it's a hurry or an immediate thing, like you have to have it done by now. But if you're going to have it, say, by next July, then they could incorporate into a process that they're going to take in the fall of next year or something like that.
okay. Elise?
I just want to jump in and say that as a law student with a planning undergraduate degree, the idea of drafting sounds wonderful. And that's all I'm going to say.
Sounds like you're volunteering, Ellie.
It sounds wonderful until
Great
you've
job.
done it a lot. So be careful what you ask for in some respects. It can be fun, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah. Okay, well, that's exciting. I feel like, yeah, this is kind of one of those things, like the opportunity to revise code, especially for like the historic district, that probably hasn't been revised since it was originally written. And so this is a pretty unique opportunity for the commissioners to be able to be involved in and have some influence. Okay. So that was one of our projects we had identified, but we knew it was further out, so we ended up not including it in our grant cycle. And then the second list is more of our longer term wish streams. So funding for local built projects. Sorry, there's not much explanation in these, so I can explain them as I'm going through. They're in my head. Funds for local / built projects. So this is like somebody in the Washburn district, somebody who owns or manages a structure that's on the National Register, wants to do a project and needs support. I mean, I guess we didn't even define whether or not it has to be identified as significant. If it meets our own standards one way or another, we would need to create some standard for what is eligible and what's not and what we're willing to provide. So there's a lot of communities that do these. I forget what the term is for them, but they're little seed money to help incentivize preservation. I think Albany or Cottage Grove, some folks locally are doing these. I think even the city of Eugene has some, but I think the city might be funding those. I don't know, it's kind of unique. We could talk to some of our partners and learn more about how folks are doing this, and then also talk to SHPO about the possibility of using CLG funds for something like this in the future, or other funding opportunities. But I think it would go a long ways to help encourage positively preservation, and also for things like window preservation, which, like, rebuilding a historic window can be fairly costly at times, and finding somebody who can do it. So providing $500 even, just to try to incentivize things like that, I think was the vision for that. Other outreach to Washburn neighborhood and residents. So any other kinds of engaging walking tours. We've talked about pub nights, educational nights, with bringing speakers in. Seems like the neighborhood groups have fizzled down, but if that ever picks up, trying to attend the neighborhood association kind of meetings. And then question mark here, is there anything to partner with the museum on? We've already done that a lot more than we have in the past, which is exciting. So just trying to continue to build that relationship. We have a lot of parallel efforts, and however we can support each other, I think is great. Awareness of skill trades and historic preservation, especially focusing on youth. So trying to help bring excitement and awareness about some of the tradespeople who do historic preservation work. And we have some of those locally in our community. So whether or not we can support them, amplify the work that they do, educate people on those skills, and then trying to bring youth into those and hands-on learning opportunities. Documentation of untold stories. This goes to working with marginalized groups and trying to increase our history, the documented history that we have available to us in relation to the Black community or American Indian Alaska Natives, or the Latinx community, other groups that live in Springfield. There's many stories that aren't told through the kind of colonial history that we have documented right now. Doesn't tell a lot of those stories. So there's also a lot of grant opportunities out there right now that specifically aim to increase research in this area. And so that is an opportunity. This would fall into the category of what Dr. Lewis was proposing. So he had proposed to do that Springfield focused study for Indigenous people in Springfield. And I think he said that would be about $5,000. Another one, so we got a long list here. Another one is tree awards. So this is kind of a dream, but somehow like documenting our trees, celebrating historic trees, trying to find a way to either join the Heritage Tree Program or develop our own and just give awards to trees, the Historic Commission Tree Award. And but like of course Jenna wants a medallion for the trees, like either in the ground or somewhere, so people can see, you know, trees that we know are historic to our community. Mark, did you have a comment?
Yeah, and I'm sure, well, maybe you are all aware of this, but Tom in particular has a very big interest in trees, is formerly an arborist. And but now I'll just mention too that now is a really good time to for the subject of trees. The mayor is quite interested in getting Springfield designated as a Tree City USA again. We formerly were and have lost that designation. And so there's momentum right now to regain that Tree City USA. So there's a lot of effort right now towards that. Our operations division specifically, but then some of our comprehensive planning staff, I think Molly Markarian, I don't know, Tom, if you've had that meeting yet or it's coming up, but Tom will be coordinating on some of these discussions around trees. So anyway, it may be a good time. And I know Tom, again, has a specific interest in heritage trees and that kind of stuff. So.
Cool.
That's correct. And that meeting is coming up November 2nd. So we'll be discussing that soon.
Great.
And one of the current city arborists was also formerly on the planning staff and liaison to the Historic Commission, right? I think he worked on a tree right outside my house the other day.
That's right. Mark McCaffrey. Yeah.
Mark, that's right. That's right. We got a lot of good knowledge.
He is also an arborist and in our operations division. So very, very good guy to have on our staff.
Is he in your operations division?
In the city of Springfield operations. Yep.
I thought he was in Eugene. Okay.
He was formerly a planner. I think he maybe did work for Eugene for a short bit. Yep.
Okay. Cool. That's great. Great to have him back. So yeah, I think there's definitely multiple opportunities there. Then it sounds like, and the timing might be right for something like that. This one seems repetitive of what we talked about before. Charlotte might want to chime in on this because I think some of these tradespeople awareness things, did I seem to cover that okay? Or is there a different project in here potentially that you see related to tradespeople and education?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I've got nothing to add.
Okay, I'm going to delete that one. I don't know why.
Okay. Yeah, it might be a little redundant to what we were, yeah.
Okay, consultant support for community input on historic sites. I'm not sure what this one was, if anybody remembers.
I do remember this one. This was about adding sites to the local designation, because we designate sites locally, and whether or not we could get some sort of support for soliciting both potential sites and feedback on those sites.
Awesome.
And I don't remember who suggested it, but I know it was not me. That's all I remember.
Good memory, at least remembering that one. Okay, so we do have our local, our local designation. So expanding that local designation, then look like actively working to incorporate more. And I think that the nice thing about that is that would help capture some of those things. Like we had the Emily West come attend our meeting and talk about some of the resources in Thurston. We know that they're out there. And so maybe capturing the ones outside of the Washburn a little bit and trying to get some other areas, really start some protections outside of the Washburn district. And then other studies and site assessments, just kind of question mark. We knew that there's probably more opportunity there. So I know, Charlotte, you sent me some other ideas. So adding on to these, did you want to share any other additions with the group?
Sure, I'll rattle off a couple of ideas that I've been kicking around. Let's see, some of them we already talked about. So using equity mapping to identify other survey areas, I do think that would be interesting. Working with an environmental historian, perhaps a particular person out of the Portland area, who is can talk about the cultural significance of trees and kind of maybe something sort of like the Dr. Lewis presentation in format and length, if we think there would be enough public interest in that topic. Also, I've been kind of thinking about whether we could put together a panel or a series or something that's on the topic of sort of the economic and environmental benefits of historic preservation. Like if we could have maybe 3 people that talk about affordable housing, carbon, maybe tax incentives. For instance, the Lane County property taxes are, your taxes are going to increase if you're doing kind of dramatic changes to your property, but if you're replacing like for like, you actually see a potential benefit and tax savings there. And there's all kinds of other programs out there. Anyway, theme of economic benefits of historic preservation.
Did you say, so sorry, let me make sure I'm capturing this. I had economic and environmental incentives for preservation with an education focus. So like a panel.
Yeah, kind of thinking about looking for all the ways that preservation might be relevant to folks who aren't just inherently interested in it, maybe making it relevant in other aspects of decision making. Kind of, I don't know, I don't have like a sexy title for it yet, but it's kicking around.
It's brewing.
Yeah. Survey of sidewalk and streetscape features. I think we already addressed this, but it sounds like there's quite a bit of sidewalk work coming our way. And if we already know, like, I don't think our code includes any protections for those features or any sort of standard procedure for what we want people to do if they're impacting sidewalk stamps, for instance.
That would be all within the like public right of way, right? But then I guess I'm just thinking out loud. So like if somebody's renovating their house, sometimes they have to repair, or replace the sidewalk themselves. So yeah.
And
Okay.
then, as an example, the city of Portland has a couple sentences that just line up in their sidewalk repair guidelines. Like if you're impacting a contractor stamp, it's just going to go away and that's fine. But if you're impacting the street name stamp, they actually have a set of stamps in the city office. And so contractors, whether it's a DIY project or professional crew, can actually come just borrow those and use them. And they specify that people should replicate misspellings and that they should repeat years if a year was stamped, but then add a backslash in the new year. So we don't necessarily have to do things the same way Portland does, but it's really helpful that they at least have a standard guidance that people can follow or should follow. The last thing I wanted to mention is that I think the Historic Preservation Commission should support, funding for whatever training the city planning staff indicate they would be interested in, or maybe not training, but maybe, and some ideas have already come up today, but I hope that we can be, I know their time is a big part of why our CLG exists, and I'd love for us to be able to honor that by really providing whatever additional support they indicate would be helpful. Oh, and then the last harebrained scheme on here is, I wondered if maybe we can do like, if we can support maybe a collaboration between one of our historic window repair shops locally and maybe pair them up with some of the student carpentry programs at the high school or the middle school level. I think that kind of goes under the category of trades and stuff. This was the only sort of specific bite-sized one that I could come up with.
So like Julie from Window Restoration, I forget what her company's called, Window Restoration.
Willamette Window.
Willamette Window, there we go.
Okay.
Could pair up with the trades programs at the high school and train them on how to do it.
Yeah, or do like a field trip to a shop or a demonstration in a classroom setting. Like, I think there's a lot of ways we could just maybe just suggest it and offer some coordination or cash to help make it happen, and then see what works best for the students and what the instructor thinks is feasible. It's just such a niche that I think a little exposure to it could be worthwhile for students who might be interested.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. And it's a totally good, like if we get this list 5 pages long, I think that's totally fine. We don't have to worry about that now. Let's just keep making lists and throwing ideas out there. And then the next phase of this can be, let's kind of vote on what we want to tackle next, but we won't lose these ideas going forward. Because sometimes what happens too is another project comes up and we're like, oh, that's very similar to this other project we had talked about. And like if the museum's doing something, or if there's another agency that is doing something similar, maybe we can partner with them and have them do some of this stuff. So nice to have it all down. So other ideas from other commissioners, things that you're passionate about, would like to see the commission participate in?
Not to add, but I do want to throw out that it seems like trees are really popular and that we've got some good timing stuff on code. Those are my inputs for the list.
Okay. I got trees in our code update, which was up on the top list of potentially including in our grant last time when we decided the timing wasn't right on that one.
So under that tree bullet point, could we add code and maybe like public presentations?
Code, like getting tree preservation in the code?
Oh, maybe I misunderstood. I thought that's what you were saying, Elise, that there's something related to code and trees. I might be wrong.
No. I was just talking about code in general, although I know to be a part of Tree City USA, you do have to have a tree code.
Oh, interesting. I don't know enough about this, but I imagine that most code that I've seen that is related to tree preservation is focused on, like the number or the size of the tree. So the size of the tree will obviously be influenced by historic trees will be naturally larger. But I don't know if there's an additional layer of code that happens with like heritage trees or, very significant trees that we know have been around. And that's something, yeah. It'd be interesting to look more into that. Adam.
I'd just like to add to the point about the museum. I'd like to see us potentially work with the Lane County Historical Museum, the Lane County Historical Society, as well as anything that the city of Eugene does with respect to their historic commissions and their historic preservation. I know that there used to be a walking tour of the historic neighborhood downtown. And if they do that, I think that would be just an interesting opportunity to see how our neighbors go about doing that and see if there's anything that we can learn.
Yeah, that's great. We had years ago, we had partnered with the Eugene folks on a training, I think at least, but we actually sat down and talked to them a little bit about some of the things that they have going on. And I think, yeah, you're right. We could probably learn a lot. Also, Shannon has worked a lot with Eugene and Cottage Grove and others. So she's also a really great resource too of like, when we find something that we're interested in and want to find another community who's done that or who might be good for partnering with on things. She seems to know a lot about what different review boards and historic commissions are focusing on. Other ideas?
I wish we had more old growth trees, but
Yeah, not so much in the city limits. We had those great, I think there were maples in front of the admin building that are no longer. Lost two good ones this year.
And there's some outside of Bruce Berg's house, which is no longer his house, but yeah, there's some really good ones there.
Yeah.
I will add on the topic of becoming a tree city. It's specifically a preservation code, and it has to at least be for public trees. That can be extended to private trees, but that's getting into a whole other realm of stuff there. So at least establishing a preservation code. And another requirement is a board and or commission, almost like what we have here, that administers or would take on cases, for instance, for heritage tree removal, whether or not it would be smart to remove it or retain it for one reason or another, or honor it in another way. When it comes to heritage trees, and typically heritage trees have a greater fee established with them through that code to say, it's really to help deter the cutting of those types of trees, where you can go ahead and cut the smaller trees, but if you have a heritage tree, it's going to be 4 times the cost to cut it down, let's say, or 4 times the mitigation. Because when you get a 2-inch caliper tree in replacement for a 65-inch caliper tree, those services are much different. So yeah, there's some layers to the Tree City USA that I think could really work in our favor for heritage trees.
It's great. Does the Tree City USA already include heritage trees as part of that then? That's just making sure I'm understanding that right. Or is that something you can include?
It's definitely something you can include. I'm not sure if it's a requirement. There's just 4 requirements to become a tree city, but then what you have in your code, specific to your location and geography, then we can establish what heritage trees are. And I have been looking quite a bit at the Veneta Preservation Code, and I like it a lot. So I'm going to be presenting that as much as possible when we're having these code meetings and stuff like that going forward with comp planning.
Okay. Is someone else gonna ask a question about that? I interrupted someone. Okay. Cool. Is there anything, Tom, that you think the Historic Commission could do in support of that process? From your perspective?
I mean, supporting recommendations that we feel are in favor for heritage trees, and me personally being a part of this, I would only offer up things that would be helpful for us in preservation of heritage trees, and specifically like what we do with the Heritage Awards. I know Jenna definitely wants to do that, having some kind of recognition program for outstanding species examples, everything that we can do to honor them. I'm certainly on board with.
Okay. Sorry, I have one more question. So we used to be a Tree City USA. Do we have documentation of trees that were either heritage trees or documented as part of that?
That's a really good question. I have not uncovered anything. I'm not sure if there are relics hanging around from when we were recognized as Tree City. That's something I can have some further conversations with Mark about, or anybody that might have a memory or recollection of, what that was like for the city, and if we had resources or any kind of records or anything available for us to help inform Tree City 2.0.
Yeah. Okay.
And Mark also added to the chat here. He said potentially the Historic Commission could also become the Tree Commission, but not sure if that's possible. And then there are protected trees as part of our natural resource inventory already. So that might be a good place to start. And I will say size doesn't always inform the age. There are some trees, like the red buds up in front on Main Street there, that grow really, really slowly, and they don't actually get that big, but they are old.
Yeah. Right. That's kind of what I was thinking about as far as like tree removal. If it's a small tree and it can get removed, but it might still have some historic value or be significant for other reasons.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so we have some good projects. I think most of my ideas are still kind of captured in here. I think I had untold stories. I'm just going to add in here that Dr. Lewis opportunity, because I feel like that's something we know that the community is pretty supportive of, at least based on our talk that we did. We had some really good response on that. It might be a good follow-up. And then the other one that has on my mind is redevelopment of Glenwood. And I think this kind of pairs a little bit with what Charlotte had talked about with equity mapping. And so if you look at Glenwood, it definitely, I feel like most likely probably falls within the realm of underserved, if that's the right word. Yeah, it tends to be probably lower income, but not get as much resources or focus. Right now with redevelopment happening, there's also the risk of, like lost resources paired with that. So whatever research or documentation that's a time sensitive one, I think. Let's see. I know that there was an RLS done, and I think the Historic Commission even funded it for the Glenwood area. And so you can find that on the city's website. I looked at it a long time ago. And I believe that there wasn't a lot found, but there are a couple buildings that exist within kind of a redevelopment zone. And I know that the city's trying to be sensitive to those as much as they can. But we don't know a lot about them, is my understanding right now. So whatever research we can do, there's kind of like the area that's getting planned for redevelopment kind of up along the riverfront. But then there's the rest of Glenwood, which we know secondarily is probably going to have trailing impacts and redevelopment happening over time as new development comes in. So the one thing we do know that's there is one of the, I actually did a bunch of research on this recently, but there is a Black church in the neighborhood that's still existing, and that's on the museum's monument, or they're doing like a historic monument kind of project that they are doing. I'm probably not speaking to this very well, but they do know that one of the buildings in Glenwood was a Black church, and so in Eugene or in the metro kind of areas way back in time. Especially Eugene, I think all the code, I'm going to butcher this, sorry, but basically purchasing houses, it made it impossible for Black people of color to purchase land. And so they were forced on the outskirts of town because they weren't legally really allowed to own land within the city limits. And so they had the name for it, which I'm not remembering right now. If anybody knows, chime
Are you
in.
thinking of redlining? Is that what we're talking about, or a different like Black exclusion code?
Yeah, it was a Black exclusion code, and there was a name though for the community that was developed just outside of Eugene across. That's what I was looking for. Anyways, that community was eventually over time removed, and all those people were displaced. And so some of those folks relocated into Glenwood. And so one of those churches is currently still standing from when that community lived in the area. And Glenwood's really interesting because it used to have the main, like the north-south corridor, the main highway actually went right through Glenwood before I-5 was built. And so we had like two main road corridors that intersected right there. You had the railroad coming by through there and the river. And it was just kind of like a hub of like all this transportation activity. And there was a bunch of music halls that were there, and cabins and hotels. Kind of, it was a different energy there in the past historically. And I think when I-5 went in, it kind of changed a lot for that region. So there are still remnants of it, but a lot was destroyed through flooding and fires over time, it sounds like. And so what's left, it might be interesting to try to identify what is left and what stories are unique to that area, because as it redevelops, it could redevelop without those stories being preserved or those elements being preserved along with it. If we're not aware of them, it's hard to preserve them. So all right. So I think those are my two big ones.
Hey, Christina.
Yeah.
In regards to the Glenwood redevelopment efforts, do we know if there is specific federal funding or federal permitting associated with any of those projects that would bring a Section 106 nexus? I'm just wondering if someone else is already going to be paying for a survey, and if we just need to make sure that they're engaging with us when they do that.
I imagine there is, but I don't know that for sure. Does anybody from the city know that?
I do not know that. Mark might.
And I'm not exactly sure what you're talking. The Section 106, is that kind of looking for historic kind of things and stuff, like do a survey?
Yeah, exactly. It's in reference to the National Historic Preservation Act. So whatever federal nexus they have, they would need to be accountable to SHPO and included in their NEPA process.
So I think that
necessarily get a copy of the research that they do.
Right, I think that is going to be a requirement of the roadway projects that will be taking place. So we recently did get federal funding for the phase 2 of the Franklin Boulevard extension, which will be from the current end of the roundabout to, I want to say Mississippi off the top of my head, but kind of one more block, basically length worth of new roadway, one more roundabout. So our engineering group will be doing that work. I think they did it for the original one. So Christy Kruger is the project manager for that. She would be the one to know more about undertaking that survey work, but it would just be within the right-of-way area or the anticipated road right-of-way area. It wouldn't go beyond that, the bounds of the project.
Okay, thank you. So is federal highways probably the source of the money?
I don't know for sure. There is federal funding involved. I'm not sure where from exactly.
Okay, thank you.
There's also, I know Allie Camp from the city is kind of overseeing the Glenwood Riverfront project and redevelopment. So I don't think there's funds on the table right now for redevelopment. It's mostly just creating a master plan for the city's approval at this point. But she may know if any of that is being accounted for, at least at this point in time.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think it would just be helpful whenever we can to try and sort of leverage what other agencies are already taking care of so that we're not, I mean, I'm sure they'll appreciate it if we get out ahead of them and do the work with our CLG funds. They'll always appreciate that. But
right,
if we can get federal agencies to pay for this, that would be great.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Right, we got a pretty good list here going. What I'd like to do is to create basically clean this up because it's pretty rough and have it make more sense, and then bring it back at our next meeting. Maybe send it out prior for review and bring it back at our next meeting for maybe a little bit of prioritization. So people can think about what's at the top. And then maybe a little brainstorming too on funding opportunities. So obviously a lot of this could be funded probably through the CLG, but it's a very small bucket. So which of these do we think might have easily achieved outside funding? So we can maybe talk a little bit about those. Any other comments or questions? Okay, is Celine still on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, did you have any other projects or ideas you wanted to add?
I don't think so particularly. This seems pretty extensive. I think I want to perhaps provide some input on once we get to the prioritization phase.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure not to forget you. Okay. Let's jump to the next thing on the agenda. I just have to find my agenda. I'm gonna stop sharing. All right, so commissioner updates. I'm gonna push that one to the end here to make sure we have time for everything else. Any updates on new commissioner? I know we just went through a recruitment process. So Tom, do you have any updates on new members?
No updates. We did not receive any applications for this round, so I believe the next round's being pushed until either the spring or late winter, something like that in 2024.
Okay. All right. That helps with knowing our next meeting time. We're not going to have somebody new joining us here in a few weeks. It's going to ask for a new meeting time after we revise our meeting time. All right, so chair nominations and voting. We have 2 positions that are open. Every year we're supposed to vote for a chair and a vice chair position for the Historic Commission. It can be the same person, or it can be a new person that's nominated. I did not have time to look into the official way to do this, so I'm going to rely a little bit on Elise or anybody else who may have some feedback on how to do this. I'm taking, I was counting on you being here, hoping you could help with this. But what we have done so far is we have put it out there to the group at the last meeting. Anybody who wants to submit a nomination, anybody who was nominated, I then followed up with them and gave them the opportunity to decline the nomination. And so today as of now, we have 2 people, 1 person nominated for each position, the chair and the vice chair. So Elise has been nominated for the chair, and Celine has been nominated for vice chair. And I think we could probably still accept additional nominations. So Elise, I'll pause here and see if you have any feedback on how to run this election process.
I think it would be wise to ask for additional nominations, and if there are no additional nominations, we could do it by acclamation. If not, then we'll have to do some voting.
Okay. So, commissioners, are there any additional nominations for the chair or the vice chair positions? You are welcome to nominate others or yourself, if you are so inclined.
Christina, are you open to being nominated?
I only have 1 meeting left in my term, so I am leaving.
Right.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can't accept it. Anybody else? All right. So do we need a vote, Elise?
So I'm going to move that we elect myself as chair and Celine Swenson Harris as vice chair of the Historic Commission by acclamation. And if there's a second, then you just ask if there are any objections.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.